Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
Hey, welcome back, everybody. I truly believe that many men are not judged properly when it comes to emotion. There's a thing called emotional intelligence, and many times men, just because of our society, suppress a lot of that. Just don't really show a lot of it because this is the way it's been from the beginning, since being a child. Big boys don't cry, all of that. We're going to talk about emotional intelligence and also self-awareness, how it relates to men. And this gentleman helps men with this and much more. Men who are struggling in their personal and professional relationships, helping them move their lives forward, breaking the chains off them from things called limiting beliefs. And he's got a great company called xyspark.org. He is Rolando Hyman, and he's back with us. Welcome. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good, Steve. It's good to be here again. It's good to be here again, buddy.
Yeah. I'm glad we're talking about this because guys get a bad rap when it comes to emotion. And I believe this thing called emotional intelligence. How would you define that?
You know, Dr. Daniel Goleman, who has written a book called Emotional Intelligence, and other researchers, guys like Slovey and other psychologists, one from New Hampshire, they they refer to emotional intelligence as really getting into that space where you're more self-aware. It's almost as if I'm quoting now, not word for word what the researchers said, but it's like taking the time to do careful scrutiny of your thoughts in the moment and evaluating and sort of, how do I say it, taking the time to measure and explore where you're at in the moment. So a part of the being emotionally intelligent is being self-aware and asking yourselves, learning how to have that internal dialogue with yourself in the moment as a way of creating more stability, grounding yourself, so to speak.
How do you get to that point where you have a good sense of self-awareness?
Steve, that's not a work that I would say comes by just sitting around. It's a work that's going to require for you and for me as men to really confront irrational thinking patterns. It's going to cause us to step back and challenge some of the core beliefs that we have about ourselves in
Mm.
order to create a new perspective. It's changing the internal dialogue. And if we're going to change the internal dialogue, Steve, we've got to be more aware, ask ourselves practical questions in the moment. Why am I feeling this way? What's causing it? And how do I confront it? And how do I measure the severity of this thought and this feeling that I'm having in the moment so that when I commit, I'll make healthier decisions when I feel like I'm in crisis.
Is it also asking ourselves, who am I? Who am I? I don't think we really ask those questions. I know that sounds ridiculous, but who am I? What do I stand for? What are my terms? What are my boundaries? Even just to write this stuff down. I don't think we do it. I don't think we know who we are, men and women.
It's real. It's a reality, Steve. Going back to Daniel Goleman, he speaks about knowing thyself. And
Mm.
how do we get to that place where we know ourselves? We will get there when we start asking ourselves real questions. If I'm angry at you, why am I angry? If I'm feeling discouraged, what's causing the discouragement? If I'm going through some depression, what has brought me to this space where I'm depressed? If I'm anxious, what's driving this anxiety? And knowing ourselves will help us to be better able to pinpoint how do I say, the rut in the road, whereby we can address it, we can fix it, we can heal, and then we can continue
Hmm.
our journey without looking back constantly on the issue itself. So it's very important, and it's a powerful question, Steve, because if we don't know ourselves, then how are we going to grow and how are we going to discover new territory? So it's important for us to ask that question and get to know ourselves.
Should we ask those questions when we're in that moment? So let's say you've got a challenging situation. Maybe you had a fallout with somebody you're close to, maybe a job situation. Is it is it practical to say, okay, let me take some stock right now, by yourself, either thinking it. I'm a big fan of writing it down because now it comes clear when you write it down because our brains are, we call it the monkey brain where you're just like the chatter, the monkey chatter. You get, think about this. Let me think about that. Let me think about this. But to write it down, how am I feeling right now? I'm feeling alone after this conversation. I'm feeling empowered. I'm feeling a little lost. Does it make sense to do that?
Steve, one of the things that we're good at as men is we tend to believe that it's okay for me to wait until I'm in crisis
Mm,
and then I'll try to get myself out. But I'm reflecting on chatting with Dr. Gregory Horton, an Olympian. I asked him, what was one of the key to his successes, and he said this that is so applicable in line with your question, because what he said is long before he went into a race, he would reflect on just sitting down in a quiet space and he would
hmm.
reflect on him running the race from start to finish. He would reflect on running that race several times in his mind. So when it's race day, apart from him going literally and training on the track and processing it in his mind, when race day, it's almost as if he's going to do the practice now because he was already familiar with the scenery, both physically and psychologically. So what we've got to not do as men is we've got to not wait until crisis comes. Is almost saying, hey, I have to expose myself to training through processing and creating, even sometimes I would say reflecting on scenarios that have passed. And as we do that, Steve, as we write some of
Hmm.
these things, as we go through it, it will prepare us better, both mentally and physiologically. So when a crisis shows up, it's not unfamiliar territory. Why? Because we were already doing some reflection. And that's the next thing. That's huge, Steve. As you talk about writing stuff down and doing that, as men, we don't do enough reflection, which is why we are not connected with knowing ourselves and being aware, because we're talking about awareness. The awareness is what is going to bring us to that space where we're able to reflect and dig a little deeper into how do I say it, the shortcoming, dig a little deeper into that area, my gray area, my weak point. And as I create that awareness, when something pops up out of the blues, I will be better prepared to react to it in a healthier way.
Love what you've said there, Rolando. And I do it myself. When I'm going somewhere, let's say a function, an event, or a party, whatever it might be, I visualize being there. I think about who I'm going to see, what they're going to be wearing, what the vibe is going to be, what I'm going to be feeling. So when I arrive, I've already been there. And more times than not, what I visualize is kind of what it is. It's amazing how it all kind of, I can't control the situation, but it is. So I feel more comfortable. I feel better in terms of what I'm wearing because I don't want to be underdressed or way overdressed. I don't think you should overdress, but not way overdressed. It's just all of it. So, and that's just one application of what you're saying. But in all areas, Mike, I think it was Michael Jordan too, used to visualize what the game would be like before he was even on the court. This is what it's going to feel like. I know I've got these two players on the other team I got to keep on my radar. And he's already done it. He's already played the game. So all he's got to do is show up and perform. But it takes away some of the, I guess, the challenge, some of the fear. You know, men don't want to admit they have fear, um, but you've been there. So this whole and emotional intelligence, they call that EQ, right?
Hmm. Yeah,
Gotcha.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And you know, Steve, if I were to reflect on Einstein, Albert Einstein, he said this. He said, all meaningful and lasting change starts with the imagination and
Mm.
work its way out. So mindset matters.
Hmm.
And the mindset that we have, Steve, is what is going to help us to create perspectives, and it's what is going to determine the kind of energy that we give off when we are interacting with others. So it's really being conscious, that consciousness around, you know, how aware am I? How emotionally connected am I to my own emotional needs, to the things that triggers me to get into that space where I'm emotionally out of sync. All right. And self-awareness, based on what it's a non-judgmental view of my thoughts and my feelings in the moment. All right. So being self-aware is one of those things that our emotions can take on a roller coaster ride. All right. And these are some of the things that we've got to be conscious of. And these are some of the encouraging pieces that Goldman and Slovey and all these psychologists mention as they seek to help men to become more conscious about the reality that self-awareness is one of those things that it's valuable for us as men to learn how to do. It will really help us, first, in the relationship that we have with ourselves, and secondly, in the relationship that we have with those with whom we interact daily, which means wives, kids, co-workers, those in the community.
This is all important stuff that we don't even think about, especially as men, being mindful of how we're feeling in the moment. And you mentioned the reference to Einstein. It sounds a little bit like we were going down the road of manifestation at that moment. Yep.
Yeah, yes, and and I'm smiling, Steve. Why? Because what I think as men we're not capturing as effectively as we should. Sometimes we get to that space where we blame the world, we blame the community, but we're not blaming ourselves. We're not recognizing that one of the big pieces that we can never forget as men is that we're not just physical, we're also psychological and emotional. And if I'm going to create new perspective, I've got to start by challenging what's going on here. How am I seeing myself? Michael Jackson, he said this, the man in the mirror. Are we as men taking enough time to talk to the man in the mirror and to challenge that man in the mirror to say, hey, it's time to stop playing around. It's time to get serious because we as men we want to have healthy relationships. We want to have successful businesses. We want to be great fathers. We want to be great employers or employees, but we're forgetting that all of that is the external. The real work has to start here and here. And that's when the change begins.
Would you also say when you confront the man in the mirror that you need to be positive? Because so many of us look at ourselves in the mirror and say, oh, look at you. Oh, look at you got over there. Look at that thing over there. Boy, you're looking old. Look at you. All that negative talk is not being supportive of us. It's just beating us down. And we would never talk to somebody, and you should love yourself, right? We
Yes,
would
yes.
never talk to somebody that we truly love the way we talk to ourselves, either verbally or even in our mind. We would never do it. You would never walk up to somebody you love and say, "Ah, look at that. You got there, you gained some weight, didn't you? Oof, I don't know. You're not looking too good today." We never do that. So I believe that we should start confronting the man in the mirror, paramount, but in a positive way.
And Steve, I'm glad you asked the question you just did in the way you did, because here is one of the challenges that comes with that. When we look at the man in the mirror, it starts with brutal honesty. It also starts with not just looking at what's happening on the surface, but acknowledging what's happening internally as well. And that's why, from the work that I do with men, Steve, I seek to say, let's look beyond just what you're seeing in the mirror and tell me what's going on in here and in here. The self-sabotaging,
Mm.
okay, the irrational thinking patterns, the self-hatred, the lack of self-compassion, you being a man, but you're abusing yourself excessively. Your alcohol use, your drug use, you not being able to really have a stable relationship. Okay, you engaging in high risk lifestyle activities. What is driving that? Self-awareness challenges you to ask those questions. So when you look at the man in the mirror, the challenge is, I want you to also, and we've mentioned this, Steve, in our last interview, I want you to also remove the mask now and be
Mm.
brutally honest about what is it that's going on with me that I need to take ownership of in order to experience change and transformation.
And you can with that. You have to love yourself. And I know it's such a cliche. And please speak on that. My belief in my journey, if you don't get to that point where you love, and it's hard for us to say that because you almost feel like you have an ego. I love myself, but you
Yeah.
need to. But once you do, there's a period of time that you realize, wow, I'm worth this. I've got this going on. I've got that integrity, whatever it is, whatever it is. So then you shoot the bar higher, you raise it up. So then you don't accept certain things in your life. You maybe gravitate away from substances because you respect yourself at that moment. What's your thoughts on all of that?
Loving yourself is not making, or how do I say it? It's not promoting narcissism. Because there are some men who
Yeah.
believe loving myself, so now all of a sudden he becomes a narcissist and he believes that he has all the answers. And he pushes that down and try to discredit or hurt others around him, because in his mind, it's because I love myself why you need to follow my lead every single time. But loving yourself captures the following elements. Number one, loving yourself is setting healthy boundaries. Loving yourself is being balanced in your perspective as it relates to how you function in your relationship, whether it is with your kids or with your partner. Loving yourself is being conscious enough to understand that there are certain self-harming behaviors that I will not engage in because it will not bring value to my life. Okay? Loving yourself is being constantly aware that the greatest gift that you have in life as a human being is the gift of choice. And as you seek to utilize this gift of choice that you have, loving yourself brings into the conversation the reality that all the things that are happening within the confines of my control. I've got to be conscious around how I react and interact and how I engage with others, keeping in mind that if I love myself in a positive way, in a good way, in a balanced way, then I'll be able to give more love to others. And hence, I will derail self-sabotage. I will derail narcissism. I'll derail all my own, how do I say it, self-ignited philosophical perceptions of self-love. And it will draw others in versus pushing them away.
Was there a time in your life where you would admit that you didn't fully love yourself?
100%. 100%. Steve, I share my story here a little bit. I went to high school with, some of the guys I went to high school with, they were, how do I say, taller guys, bigger guys, and I mentioned one of the names, Dr. Gregory Horton, who was an Olympian. I went to school with him, and he's a pretty tall guy too. And in high school, I wasn't head and shoulders with all the other men. So I was challenged. But one day, Steve, I came to that place where I had to answer the following questions. And I said this to myself, and some persons find this very humorous, but it worked for me. Number one, I said to myself, hey, I might not be as tall as everybody else, but I'm not the shortest guy. I might not be as handsome as everybody else, but neither am I the ugliest guy. I might not be as rich as everybody else, but I'm not the poorest guy. So you know what? I've got to learn to celebrate my authenticity and celebrate who I am as a person and what I have got to give to humanity from where I'm at. And that's how the love for myself took off to the next level.
When you give back to based on what you have inside, I mean, that's a whole other topic. We could talk about volunteering and such. I don't know if I ever shared this with you, but I heard that boys have much more emotional intelligence than girls. Much more, much more. However, and I know somebody that's writing a book on this. However, as boys, we're told big boys don't cry. And what are you getting upset about? Be a man. And in doing that, we suppress all of that. And many boys, we look and they're like, oh, they're crazy. Look at the little girl. She's nice and quiet. In my understanding, that boys are quote unquote crazy when they're younger is because they don't know how to process the emotion. They are
Yeah.
so much more emotionally intelligent. I don't know how to deal with it. I'm a boy. Why am I feeling this way? I don't know what this is. What am I feeling there? I'm told not to cry. It's all confusing. It's all just, it's a whole new world. And we've got the intelligence in us, emotional intelligence as men. We're not really sure what to do with it.
And Steve, one of the things, Steve, that's missing is we don't know how. We don't know how to groom that, and we don't know how to seek to coach our boys into that. Let's say my great grandfather, he taught my grandfather taught my father taught me.
Mm.
So there is a deeply rooted cultural piece to it. And the piece now, Steve, is as we're learning and we're becoming more aware of what that is, what we've got to do as professionals, as coaches, other coaches like myself, and psychologists like myself, we have got to become more mindful about how do we challenge and confront this misunderstanding in the community so more men and boys can be a lot more proud of the way they connect with their emotional self, realizing that, yes, I'm a boy, but there's more emotion than anger.
Yeah.
Okay. That's not just it. There are more emotions out there. And as a man, it's okay for me to discover those, to own those, and to celebrate those because it does not make me less of a man. It makes me human and it makes me
Right.
stronger.
Well said. Well said. In me joining a men's group, I think I mentioned to you a couple of weeks ago. I joined about 8 weeks ago. Very empowering because I'm learning that we're all dealing with the same stuff, in whether it's anger, whether it's emotions, whatever it may be. Rolando, how does somebody connect with you, even just for a conversation, to see how you might be able to help a man move his life forward?
And you can find me on the internet. You can email me, Hyman at xyspark at gmail.com, or you can find me at Hyman at xyspark.org. You can check my website, it's xyspark.org. And I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram, I'm on TikTok, I'm on YouTube. Once someone reaches out to me, we can set up even a 15-20 minutes consultation, and we can chat a bit for sure.
I'm not going to brag here, but once you do the work and you get to the point where I finally feel pretty good, it's an amazing feeling, isn't it?
It is, Steve. And if I were to piggyback on what you just said, one of the mantras that I promote when I work with men is remembering this, and I'm leaving it with you too, Steve, is that personal development is not an event, it's a lifestyle. So as you're feeling great, Steve, you've got to just continue to create a plan to maintain that.
Yes.
That it becomes a lifestyle.
All part of the journey. we never really arrive. We're always still moving forward in all different areas. Rolando, it's been great talking with you during these podcasts. Learned a lot, and appreciate you and what you do.
Thank you, Steve. It's just a pleasure being here.
Same. We'll be right back.
Are you looking for even more of the podcasts and hosts that you love? The Podcast Business News Network is proud to announce that you now have even more ways to listen live. Check out the MyTuner Radio, online radio box, and Simple Radio apps on iOS and Android, or find us online. Search for Business News Network on mytuner-radio.com, or search Podcast Business News Network on streama.com and onlineradiobox.com/US. Take your podcast on the go and don't miss a minute of the action.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
For nearly 2,000 severely injured veterans, everyday life has become filled with barriers.
Day-to-day simple tasks can become pretty daunting.
I have to carry my chair up 2 flights of steps or have somebody do it for me.
What scares me the most is just the falling.
When I'm struggling with my house, I think, to have that one great barrier just knocked down, it's crucial.
Home for Our Troops is a wonderful nonprofit that builds a
mortgage-free, fully adaptive, handicap-accessible house. And there's no catch.
It'll be our very first home that we've ever owned.
This is a game changer.
This is where your life begins again.
We need you to join us in completing this important mission. Please visit hfotusa.org and help build homes and rebuild lives.
Because of you, everything's going to be okay.